I've been waiting all day for this. Baron, my handsome man.
Hi, human.
Hey, babe, you ready? All right, let's roll it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Soul Sense, where I feel really grateful today to be joined by Justin, who actually used to be a teacher of mine, a professor of mine at St. Lawrence, and now he's just a human being who I have the pleasure of following through social media and continuing to keep up with the work that he's doing in our community and the community of Kingston. So Justin, welcome this morning. And tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, the type of work that you do in Kingston.
So thanks for the introduction. Super stoked to be here. So right now I'm part of the Addiction Mental Health Services crisis team. Recently I was attached to the Kingston Police Unit. So for those who don't know, it's called MCERT, which stands for Mobile Crisis Rapid Response Team. I have a lot of experience from working in hospitals on the detox unit, working in maximum security institutions, doing what we call a behavioral science technician, working with children's mental health as a family intensive counseling therapist, working in rehabs, teaching at St. Lawrence. But right now, I have the pleasure of not only being attached to Addiction Mental Health Services, but working in conjunction with Kingston Police on their mobile team.
There's just like a moment where I need to say thank you for what it is that you do, because even in listening to you, it's certainly not what you've chosen as your path in life is not a light load that you carry when it comes to all of the things that you see, that you're exposed to, that you experience. So I'm first off, I'm curious, and I want to know what is it that creates the passion that I know that you have for helping people in any form of mental health or addiction or trauma or situation? What is it that pushes you forward to do that, to do the work that you do? Because I can't imagine a day for you is easy sometimes when it comes to the individuals that you engage with. So what brought you to this, and how do you do it so passionately every day?
Yeah, that's like a really long, I'll try and like give you the Coles notes from a really long story. So I have my own abuse story, from sexual abuse to physical abuse, emotional and verbal, starting at the age of 2, that proceeded throughout my life. Experiencing racism. So I lived abroad for a long time. I lived in Spain on a small island called the Canary Islands for 10 years, and went through racism as a white person and also as a Canadian within a Spanish British colony. And those experiences really shaping, sometimes I say to people, when you're a parent, you want to tell your children there isn't monsters under the bed, but there is. There really is. And I remember being a young man, young boy who was anxious as all heck, a little bit of a stutter, really awkward, and abused. And going throughout my life, experiencing anger, hearing some of the things I heard, experiencing some of the things I heard, which led me down a pretty dark path that, I would never say I'm proud of, but has shaped who I am. And, I remember when I was, a teenager, having a whiteout of anger and not remembering, and, what supports were put in place for me at that time, which was nothing, absolutely nothing. So a big passion of mine is centered around, children not going through that, but also looking at the broad spectrum of developmental ages and where to help people, and, catching people at their worst, right? Which is, it sounds bizarre, but, being that quiet voice when you're struggling more than anything, and being able to support people through that recovery. Like mine, I entered recovery at the age of 22 after, abusing alcohol pretty severely for a large part of my teenage and young adult years. When I moved to Toronto, that followed me. And then, the male gender issues, I think, are something that are becoming more and more talked about. Like I think from my class, you watched the documentary, The Mask You Live In.
Mm-hmm.
And really being that voice for people, because I have an anxiety disorder, right? I have been in recovery. I have been at my lowest. I have scraped around for money. I've lived across from crack dens. I've lived a weird life, and there's nothing more fulfilling than even being a small part of someone's journey. And I find it like it's a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to support people through their darkest moments, their best moments, and everything in between, and be that voice that pushes people. Like I'm known as kind of like I wouldn't say like I'm not Mr. Empathy. I'm Mr. Compassion, but also like about how to push people to the next level and make them become their best selves, because that's what I've had to do, right? And I've done that with a little bit of help here and there, and I think as a man, it's really challenging. I think it's challenging for every gender, regardless. But as a man, to reach out for help and to experience that shame in a different way, I think is really, it's hard, and battling the male gender issues. That's why I love working with men. From offenders, and I work with sexual offenders, murderers, to angry teenage boys who at 13 years old are using crystal meth, and they're foster kids or they're adopted, and seeing that like a level of pain and kind of being like, buddy, like you're not alone, but also holding them accountable, right? Like I think that's the important thing.
I love that. I think now that will kind of lead me to my next question. So do you think that because you've experienced your own life through the lens of many of these things, and you're also very well educated in what it is that you're doing, and you've gone to school, and I know you're continuing to go to school. I believe you're in your master's right now, which is incredible. Like just everything you do, I find so incredible. Do you think that because you have the combination of both of those things, it kind of puts you in a different position to be able to be a resource and a help to individuals versus maybe someone who only has lived experience, who's gone into this type of work, or someone who's only chased education but doesn't have experience from their own life? Like, do you think that there's a different viewpoint from every one of those, or that they're all just as resourceful for the individual that they're helping?
I think that's a question you've actually asked me in one of my classes. And it's something I get asked a lot. So the lived experience versus education question. Mm-hmm. Is lived experience a benefit? Yes. Is it also a curse? Yeah. Right. So one of the things that I think is really important is, where are you in your wellness when you have lived experience? I sometimes struggle with the peer navigator role, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. I think there's a level of understanding of where you are and your education level that's necessary, like to be able to properly help someone to understand the boundaries, to keep your own story. It happens a lot where someone says, like, what do you know? Like I had a Black person say that to me about racism, and I was like, what do you know about me? I have been racially treated. I've been treated poorly racially. Like, I'm not saying I understand, right? And I think we really dance an interesting balance between the two. What I think is always really important, lived experience or not, is core foundational skills. Whether you're able to have like a genuine relationship with someone and authentic. Authentic, I think, is really underrated.
Right.
I'm not known for sometimes being the most eloquent person, especially when it comes to some of my employers, past and present. Sometimes I'll say I'm an advocate. Sometimes I'll say you're a pain in the rear end, and you push some boundaries. But I think it's really important, those core foundational skills combined with knowledge, right? And being in a place of wellness. And one of the traps I think we fall into with lived experience is your journey is separate, right? And being able to be aware of when you're triggered. I think that's really important when you're struggling with boundaries. One of the things that I really, really stress in my work is being very on the fence, very unbiased, which can be harder when you have lived experience and when you're triggered. Like, I know people really struggle working with sex offenders, right? And it's because they have children. And then you kind of have to remember that there's multiple sides to this story. Like, most sex offenders I know were extremely abused, right? And being able to have that empathy. I think if I were to choose between the two, I would choose a counselor I'm able to relate to.
Right.
And sometimes that's through lived experience. Like my counselor, shout out to Justin McCourt, who's phenomenal. We're very similar people. And I find that much easier for me to engage in an authentic relationship as a client with him, because he can relate to what's going on with me. And then we have to remember about people who we feel don't have lived experiences. It's really challenging to go through this life without experiencing pain. And I know you follow some Buddhism mentalities, right? And the Four Noble Truths, I think, really stands out for me when I work with people, which is, life is pain. We are the cause of our own pain, and we're also our own salvation, and through right action and right behavior. So when people overemphasize empathy, right, I get kind of triggered. I'm more of a believer in compassion, and Dr. Gabor Mate's compassion inquiry, right? You can't feel what I felt, right? And nor do I want you to, nor do I want you to express that you can, because I find that really aversive. Like, I've worked with Indigenous individuals who, I've seen them have an empathic approach, and then they've responded to my approach more favorably, because I said, I don't know what you've been through, nor could I ever. And I find it, like, when someone says, I know what you mean, or I know how you feel, I'm like, no, you don't. It's a very individualized experience. And to try and empathize with me, I find kind of patronizing, to be honest. But you can feel compassion, and that's not, compassion and sympathy are different things. It's not pity, right? It's like, wow, that person is in pain, and that is painful. You must feel so much pain. You don't have to inject your experience onto mine. And it's more about your skill as an individual, your ability to feel compassion and be genuine, and say, I don't know what that is like. I have no experience as someone who's Indigenous. I have no idea. I didn't grow up in this country, right? I'm totally clueless, and I'm very authentic about that. Does that make me more aversive to work with? Does it make it harder for us to relate to one another? No, I approach it with genuine curiosity. So I think it more comes down to not whether it's lived experience or not. It's about your ability to engage in a therapeutic relationship with Rogerian concepts. So unconditional positive regard, believing that, this person wasn't born bad, right? They have done things they're not proud of, that they feel shame for, and that they can change, right? And this might not be the moment that they want to change or can change, and that's perfectly fine. I've worked with lots of people who aren't ready to engage in trauma work, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? They want to continue laying devastation upon their life. That's okay. You have a right to do that, right? And other people have a right to respond accordingly. And when you're ready, like, we're all here and waiting, as well as, just being honest with people. Like, I think that's really, we've entered a time zone within social media, within the concepts of validation and empathy, where, we're seeking to sometimes to pander to people. Whereas I believe in just strong feedback. I'm a big believer in Adam Grant. He's a organizational psychologist. He's got a great podcast called Work Life, and one of them is about like criticism and genuine criticism. Like, I stand up for when I don't believe what you're doing is right. I can say, I can understand why and all of those things, but I'm not going to validate your trauma. I'm not going to validate your behavior. I'm going to hold you to a standard, just like I hold myself, right? And I think that's a big part of genuineness that's been lost. And one of the people say, the therapeutic relationship is really functional, and it's a space for me to be heard. And I'm like, okay, like, that's sounds like you're being validated, right? Which is great. And then what? Right? Your story is being validated. We're confirming your narrative. We are kind of saying it's okay to behave this way. And a lot of therapists, especially like inexperienced ones, kind of fall into that trap. And I hear that a lot. Like, I can validate you, but there's this next part to it that, you're also not telling me the whole truth, because you're choosing to withhold something that you feel shame about, and that's okay. It's not going to help you, and you're also sharing only your perspective. And that was a bit of a rant, and
No, that was actually a really great way to put it. And I think also, and maybe it comes from a little bit that speaks to having lived through experiences, that not only did we live through those experiences, but we did require more of ourselves to kind of level up and continue to move through what that healing is, right? And I do feel that's a really beautiful piece of your story and what you've done, and you just speak so well to that. And you did mention, first off, well, Gabor Mate, I just finished his compassionate inquiry training. So it is something that I think anyone who's working with individuals on any level, if you're a practitioner in any way, from a yoga teacher to a movement therapist, to anyone, I think it's actually very important to take to take even the smaller version of his training, just to understand human to human a little bit more, because sometimes I think we forget that at times. But you spoke to your counseling, and as someone who works in the field that you work in, one of the last things I want to touch in is how important or what precedence can you put on the wellness that you have for yourself, and how that helps balance out what it is that you do every day. So I know that you have your physical wellness that you really take care of. You take care of your body. You mentioned counseling, so you're taking care of mental and emotional things. What other pieces of that support system for yourself do you find so imperative, especially because of the line of work that you're in?
So that's a good question. So I think there's like a difference between, like, if you're asking me about what is the foundation of like good trauma treatment versus, my own journey in wellness. So for myself, what I found is everyone identifies with a different modality when they're learning in counseling or when they're in therapy. For myself, as a client and as someone who experiences the recovery and journey of wellness, there's a bunch of things that really benefit me in terms of working towards being the best version. And one of those things is remembering that there's always room for improvement. And a big part of that is growth, right? And I know that's kind of like a hot topic, hot term these days, just like compassion is. Whereas, one of the things that's really important to me is taking a continuous inventory of myself, right? One of the things that always stands out for me is when, people are posting on Instagram about their boundaries and, kind of slamming other people for their behavior. And I find it actually really toxic, because one of the things that I do and I encourage people to do, and it sounds kind of AAE, which is fine because I think that's a really great program for it in its own ways, is about taking an inventory of yourself. And that's something I do pretty often, which is, where am I lacking? Am I slipping in this area? I'm renowned as a workaholic. So am I focusing too much on that? And that's always been a continuous kind of battle for me, especially within therapy and finding my sense of fulfillment in that. And if you look at logotherapy, which is one of my favorite modalities, it's about purpose, right? So I found a purpose. And there are 3 areas are purpose in work, purpose in love, and purpose in activities. And how do you, once you have all of those 3, your wellness becomes different. It becomes motivated and guided. And it can only be done through consistency. And one of the things my therapist, 2 of the things my therapist kind of brought forward to me was burn the boats. And that really stood out for me. And I heard it in a YouTube video recently, which was, don't give yourself an excuse, right? Don't allow yourself to have this other avenue, this net to catch yourself with. I had 3 jobs at once. I was working a full-time, a part-time, and a casual. I was working 70 hours a week. And it was all this fear, right? About, this field is so poorly funded. What if? And he kind of, and sacrificed my wellness. And he kind of looked at me and he's like, you got to burn the boats, man. You gotta go for the job that you love, that you want. And I loved detox. I loved children's mental health. I loved AMHS, but what was going to bring me the most wellness? And looking at that and kind of going, I want to be with MCERT. It's been my goal since I heard about it 8 years ago. Like, it's been my dream job, and I had to burn the boats. I had to kind of commit. And the next piece of advice he gave me was, I'm a big believer in consistency, right? And determination. And he kind of looked at me one day about a topic that I really struggle with, and he talked about effort. He said, you're consistent, right? You show up to the gym every day and you put in this extraordinary effort. Where are you not putting effort in your other areas that you want it? Where you say you have this goal and you're always working towards it, right? But how much effort are you putting in? And it made me think of, there's this person that I know who, they post they've been working out for an hour and a half and they've burned 300 calories. Like, I work out for 45 minutes and I burned 700, because it's about effort, right? I don't just show up. I show up at the maximum. And how do I do that for myself? And how do I do that in the areas? And that requires taking an inventory. So one of the recent things that I've always been back and forth with about my own wellness, and something that I kind of preach to people, is about yoga, right? So getting back on that path of like, okay, doing yoga twice a week, I need to engage in this practice, and adjusting my mindset around it. What's the language I'm using around yoga? And that's a big part of some of the therapeutic techniques that I use, which is, I call it compassionate radical acceptance. I know, right?
Those are my favorite things.
Right. So like I'm trained in dialectical behavioral therapy. Shout out to Marshall Linehan. And how do I accept and change? Because that's the foundation of radical acceptance. How do I accept where I'm at, and how do I change it within the same conversation? But an extension of what she was talking about is bringing in Dr. Gabor Mate, which is, how do we do that with compassion towards ourselves? Not to pander to ourselves, to be like, this is where I'm at right now, and that's totally understandable. And it's also not where I want to be. We're not going to use the word but. We're going to use, and it's not where I want to be. And I can do that by doing X, Y, and Z. So when it came to my personal fitness, and it was, I have a YouTube premium, right? So I chose, instead of, I haven't drank for 30 days. One of my best friends, I had chosen a direction of harm reduction for myself after years of bartending and everything, and he had chosen abstinence. So we were on the phone the other day, and he celebrated his 3 years alcohol free, and I kind of sat there and I said, like, I have that challenge accepted, and I said, I'm like, well, I'm not going to drink, and that's going to be my choice. And I sat back and I went, how much money am I spending on that? And where can I redevelop or repurpose that money towards my wellness? So that YouTube premium, where I'm listening to Arnold Schwarzenegger, right, and Dwayne Johnson, and famous celebrities about like motivation, determination that fuel my drive. And then what are some of the foundations we talk about with clients, right? So like audiobooks, right? How do I repurpose my time? So I'm doing some yoga, and I'm like, okay, it's physical activity, it's stretching, it's calming. That's the neuropsychology around anxiety. So it's what my doctor told me to do X amount of years ago that I've been ignoring. Go me.
You were just doing life research to see if you could do it without that.
Yeah, she was like, do you want medications? I was like, no, I don't. She's like, go to yoga. I'm like, I will.
Maybe.
And also like with that, like my own like gender interpretations and my own judgments that I was placing on myself going to do something like that. But that's neither here nor there. And what am I doing with that money? So like I'm listening to an audiobook about like one of them is called Barking Up the Wrong Tree, or The Compound Effect, and they sound corny and they sound cheesy, but it's about like consistent effort, and that's something that I want to be a part of. Or I'm one big issue I find in this field is the lack of funding towards professional education and continuing professional education. So that's something that I recently bought a bunch of trainings in the summer, and I've been going through and listening to the videos about the neuroscience behind anxiety treatment, right? And that's something I add to my resume, but also something I add to my clients, to my own wellness. And I'm doing that while stretching, right? It's about how I'm using my time and not just sitting there watching Netflix and chilling by myself.
I love that. Also, The Compound Effect is a great book. I am an Audible user like crazy. I found even traveling to school, I think I crushed like 12 books a semester just in driving. It's so different. I could talk to you for hours. There's just, I always feel myself, I got like these questions in overload. But before I let you go, we're in a really strange time in the world right now. It's COVID. I don't know what everyone else's situation is in their location. We're in, you know, a stay-at-home order for sort of the second time around here in Ontario. A lot of people are maybe went into a lockdown on a different trajectory than perhaps the one that they're on right now. Maybe their mental health has gotten a little bit more extreme than they thought, or addiction has made its way in, or substance of some kind.
Mhm.
For someone struggling right now with mental health or addiction or both, what is something you can offer them, Justin, or some resources that you can suggest, or just a little few words of wisdom for anyone struggling in this moment that could use that? It just is such a, you know, it's just such an interesting time in life right now. And I think now more than ever, people need to hear what's available and what they can do.
Yeah, so you said a few words and I'm never good at that. So I apologize in advance. Um, so I'll start with what happened with myself during lockdown as one of the things, like I lost my greatest self-care mechanism, which was the gym. I've been religious for years. It is the greatest factor in my wellness of all time. And I went into a pretty like strong depression, which happens when I'm not able to engage in my self-care activities. So I worked myself to death essentially. And I gained weight and I became very unhappy. And that was during the first lockdown. And about like 8 weeks in, I sat there and I kind of looked at my priorities and I said, I have a decision to make here. One of the things that's always plagued me is running. And I've always come up with excuses, right? And I have a knee condition. I have some physical health issues. And I kind of had been off and on for years with going back to running. When I was young, I was a semi-professional athlete and a cross-country runner, and kind of that like negative self-talk, right? Like I could always talk my way out of it, like it's gonna hurt or it'll be sore, and you know that narrative that I buy into with myself, which always happens with people, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We have a narrative, right? And you have the ability to change that narrative. And you have the ability to not believe it. So one of the things I say on the crisis line is, especially when people are suicidal, is like, you can have thoughts of suicide. You can not feel well and still act differently, right? You can, just because you're having this thought doesn't mean you have to believe it. And the science says we have 50,000 thoughts in a day, 80% of which are negative. Are all those true? No, they're only true if you make them. So I had this decision to make about my own wellness, and I put away some money and I said, you know, this is my goal, right? I want to get back into shape, and I spent more money than I should have in fitness equipment and setting myself up, and that became the greatest motivator for myself, right? So if you look at the neuroscience and the evidence-based treatments, some of the most foundational things that people kind of scoff at, but also don't truly appreciate, is the core foundations of self-care. And I'm not talking about taking a bubble bath or getting your nails done. Sorry, everybody. It's about consistent sleep, right? So when you're in a state of anxiety, or you're struggling with COVID or trauma or PTSD or anxiety or depression, there's core foundational things that will change your wellness, which is sleeping and exercising and yoga, right? So what happens when we go through traumatic events or long-term stress is we activate our sympathetic nervous system. And with that, it becomes overactivated over time. It becomes exhausted and becomes kind of like a state of being, to simplify it. The benefit is there's this other system that we have to engage that in this busy social media world we're not always great at, which is the parasympathetic. What are the best ways to activate that system? Deep breathing, sleeping, eating well, physical exercise, right? It's foundational. That stuff will change your life.
Mm.
Those are the foundational coping skills. And that's where it all begins. So if you're not doing those, you have an opportunity right now to change that, right? Like there's that corny YouTube video that says, you know, treat it like NASA. You have this exact moment to change your life. People call the crisis line, and sometimes, you know, like it's about validating and kind of figuring out what's going on. And then you say, okay, and now we have this moment. In this moment, what can you do? I was going for a run the other day around my house, and not just around my house, like around the block. And there was this hill. It was towards the end. I was really tired. And I looked at the top of the hill and I looked at my present moment and I went, I have the opportunity. Should I save my energy for the hill? Or should I use it right now? And I had this like battle in my mind, because that's what happens. We have these battles in our mind. We talk to ourselves to no end. And I went, I'm gonna give it all I have right now, because I don't know when I get to the top of the hill how much energy I will or won't have. Mm-hmm. Likelihood is I'll have more in my tank. Most people don't appreciate or don't understand or haven't realized their fullest potential. One of the things that I have tattooed on my arm, it's not necessarily the religious intent behind it that matters to me, but it's the spiritual, which is the kingdom of God is within you, which is about, you know, I look at my own spiritual beliefs. I don't pray to this person to bring me sustenance. I believe that there's this internal power within each individual that they're able to access, given the right guidance, given the right understanding, given all the right tools and the right motivations. I know everyone shies away from that word, but there's nothing wrong with it. You have that ability. We just have to unlock it. And that's what has to happen. You have to look at what do you have in this moment to propel you forwards. And at each given moment, you have the ability to change. Was I doing super duper well January 1st? No, and that's okay. Like there was areas of my self-care that were missing, right? It was easy to make an excuse, like I'm tired. Who isn't tired? Like we all work 50 hours a week to try and afford houses we can't afford because of the generation squeeze. But at the end of the day, like it's up to you. Like no one's going to do it for you. You have this moment to change your life, whether it's a phone call to a friend, a phone call to the crisis line. Get up and go for a run. It doesn't have to be fast. It doesn't matter as long as you do it, right? It sucks. Like I went to work out the other day and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. And then I got into the workout. I put on one of the YouTube playlists and I went to town, and it was the greatest feeling. And I came out and, you know, I get like little amped up and crazy during my workouts. I apologize to anyone near me. And that's okay, because like I need it. Like you seek for something deep within you. Because if you want to change, you will. That's up to you. And you have this moment to change or not. You're accountable for that. If you want to get trauma treatment, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait 3 months unless you're going to pay for it. But you got to wait 3 months. It's 3 months. And that sucks. It's terrible. Our system is underfunded. You know, you could call a center right now and they'll say, well, you have a session in a month. It's a lie. It's an intake session. And then you have to wait 2 months till you see your counselor unless it's a student. which is fine. Students are great. I'm about to be one. But it's up to you, right? You can change your life in this moment. You can think about it, because I say to people all the time, is this hard? Is being this way hard? And they always say yes. There's no shadow of a doubt. And I know I'm 10 for 10 on this. And I say, is changing really hard? And they go, yeah. And I'm like, sounds like both are really hard. And unfortunately, trauma's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. You're accountable now. And you get to choose your hard. You can do short-term coping, short-term gain for long-term pain. I say that all the time. Or we can struggle. We can increase that window of tolerance. We can struggle, and we can find a different way to look at that struggle. We see this barrier, this excuse that we have. I say that's an obstacle. This is the 200-meter hurdle. This isn't the 200-meter dash. You're gonna hit a hurdle, and whether you get up and stand up is up to you. You're allowed to hit the hurdle. How do you stand up?
I think so I don't even have anything to add to that, or it was just that it's so well put. And I think sometimes it is easy, and it's not taking anything away from what people live through in their life, but sometimes it's easy to remain the victim. Just as difficult to remain the victim and live in what that is than it is to take control of our own life. And so there's I really like that sentiment. It's up to us, no matter where we are in the journey. It's totally up to us how we choose to write the rest of the story. So thank you.
You're either the object or you're the subject. You're either the object or the subject. You choose which one you're going to be today. And when you come into therapy, it's not just as easy as I say 1, 2, 3 and let's go. Like, it's gonna be brutal. Like, I can ask some of my clients, have they cried? Have they broken down? Have I made them feel worse? Of course, because you need to feel that way. I'm sorry. Like, but I'm not. Like, that's necessary. And when you look at treatment, right, it's complicated, right? The evidence shows we should be looking at so many different aspects. It should be sequential, right? It's not you walk into a session and 1, 2, 3, 4, let's go. It's done. It's gathering information, building this relationship. People come into trauma treatment and they say, I'm going to talk about my trauma right now. And I'm like, whoa. Let's get to know each other first. Let's get some coping skills in, right? Let's build this. Let's not rush it. You can tell me what the trauma is, but we're not going to relive it right now. We're not ready for that. And I want to educate you on what's going on with what this therapy is and the science behind it, right? Like the neuroscience behind PTSD and anxiety. So you can understand and feel. And one of the biggest things that I say is we're trying to reconnect mind and body. And that is one of the hardest experiences to go through, because that's what trauma essentially is. And trauma is more encompassing than, sorry to everyone who believes in the ACEs, but that's such a small snapshot of trauma. So grief, trauma, it's so complicated. And we experience this massive disconnect, and the struggle we have to reconnect is really challenging, and it's gonna be a kind of a process. And I've had to go through that, reconnecting with my body. And one of the things that I've pledged myself to learning is something called somatic experiencing as a therapist, to connect that, where do you feel the trauma in your body? Because it's there. And Dr. Gabor Mate is the big one about that, and there's some new author who goes on about it, but this is before him to Dr. Gabor Mate, where your body feels it. Your body will say no. That's what happened with my anxiety. my mind was strong enough to withhold it, but eventually, like, I was having these heart pains and I had to go for heart testing, and they were like, give in your life, this is what's going on. And it was connecting with the body and the mind to kind of say, oh my God, there's something missing here. And that's where, I think we get lost in this mindfulness present moment. It's not about connecting with the present moment. It's connecting with your mind and your body at the same time in the present moment. And how we word that, interpret that, whatever clients need to feel to understand that. Like, I know as a male, when someone says, mindfully eat this piece of fruit, I'm like, oh, good luck with that. See you next Tuesday. I'm not doing that. But when we say, like, I want you to feel, right? I want you to sit there and engage in progressive muscle relaxation, which has been one of the most beneficial things in treating male trauma, right? And one of the foundational skills you learn before you delve into your trauma with, like, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, it's like revolutionary, right? So it's a complicated process that will never really get understood until you go through it.
So you go through it, and then to be, to come back to what you were saying, compassionate with yourself about what that looks like in the different phases in your life. Because I feel that although, speaking to myself specifically, I can manage and handle certain things, and then maybe something else just comes up, or you become more deeply connected with self, or you really start to move through those growing phases, and to be compassionate with your own process. Because I've also learned it's always a process. There's never a moment where you and I wake up, we're like, shit, that's it, we're fixed. Onward and upward with everything that's going on. So to encompass all of those things with self is really great. Justin, thank you so much for giving me a glimpse to the inside of your mind today. I appreciate it, and just keep doing what you're doing, because whether you realize it or not, the ripple effect of who you are is enormous. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate knowing you and just having you within my network. It's just fantastic, you doing what you do. So thank you.
Well, I can't say it eloquently as you, but same to you. I think I'm always super impressed, and I'm proud to have been your professor at one point and now your colleague in the field, and see that you do. It's phenomenal, and continuing the message, and I'm happy to always chat, smile, and look pretty.
I love that. Well, this will be, I know, the first of many chats, because my mind is just moving so quickly with you in it. So thank you. Have a wonderful week. Just all the best to you. And take care of yourself in this crazy, uncertain world. And maybe soon we'll see each other not through this virtual thing.
Yeah. Live long in Lysol.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.